Part 36. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 351. The sky is bright and mist is filling Taiji Lake, making you feel like you are in a sea of clouds. In the room at the stern of the ship, Su Buling got up and put on white foam, opened the window facing the lake, and took a deep breath of the morning air, feeling that his waist was a little sore. After listening to Zhongju's words, Su Buling was naturally a little panicked, and did not dare to leave some cold poison to trick the baby. Yesterday, he solved it very seriously and wrote the word positive to the baby. After working all night, the effect is still good, and the slight cold poison in the body can no longer be felt. But it didn't seem right to explain it cleanly. Su Buletinling took a pulse and felt it. Just like Zhongju said, there was some ink stain on the white cloth. No matter how you wash it, there are still traces of flaws. Although it has no effect on the body at all, and you can't even feel it. When I arrived, I felt a little uncomfortable in my heart. Only now did Su Buling completely believe that Zhongju was an upright man. No one would have a compromising attitude towards his health. Since Zhongju was 100% sure that he could recover as before, there was nothing difficult about becoming a disciple. Yes, the palace does not lack the position of a retainer. Humph. While thinking, there was a sound from behind. Su Buling turned around, only to see Mr. Bao Bao, who had been bullied miserably, huddled in the quilt, revealing a pair of watery eyes. His face was still red, his breath was like blue, his hair was messy, and he looked like he had suffered a lot, staring at him with cannibalistic eyes. With a smile on his face, Su Buling sat down next to Xiao Xiang'er and raised his hand to press the quilt tightly. "If you sleep a little longer, there will be nothing on the boat." Xiao Xiang'er wanted to curse a few words, but was unable to do so. She lay on her side on the pillow and gasped for breath. After holding on for a while, she couldn't muster the strength, so she could only complain with tears in her eyes. "You are nothing. I begged you, just 3 times, I almost died." There were no outsiders in the boudoir, and there was nothing to avoid between the couple. Su Buling raised his hand and laid Xiao Xiang'er down to make it more comfortable, and said with a smile, "We haven't seen each other for a few days. I miss the baby and am a little impulsive." Xiao Xiang'er didn't even have the energy to speak, so she tilted her head and went inside, ignoring Su Buling. Su Buletinling possessed her and kissed her on the forehead, then stood up and walked outside the door without disturbing her. Mrs. Lu was standing in the corridor with a bowl of chicken soup, her expression dignified and quiet, but the expression in her eyes was very strange. When she saw Su Buling, she looked away. Su Buling walked up to him, "Let Jiao Yi go, Aunt Lu goes in, Xiang'er has to jump into the lake." Mrs. Lu pretended to be calm, "Can she still dance?" "Well." Su Buling blinked, smiled, and said nothing, called Jiao Yi over, and ran down to wash up. Mrs. Lu pursed her lips and waited for a while. After Su Buling left, she walked slowly outside the door, leaned against the door frame, and looked inside. "Xiang'er, are you sick? Why do you need the maid to feed you when you're eating? Lu Hongluan, are you sick? I care about you, why do you speak so hastily? It's really hard to detoxify your child. The weather is nice today. Do you want me to go out for a walk with you? Just wait for me." He. Seeing her best friend gritting her teeth and blushing in embarrassment, Mrs. Lu felt much better and left the room with satisfaction. The morning light breaks out, and the warm autumn sun disperses the mist on the lake. After Su Buletinling was dressed neatly, he came to the deck of the building boat. He looked up and saw Zhongju standing under the willow tree on the shore of the lake, holding a small bowl of fish food in his hand and teasing the koi under the water. The morning light shone on the side of the touching face. Maybe it was because of the few days of exposure. The gentle personality overpowered the charm in the bones. It seemed that Ning Yuhi really had the fairy air of being born in this world. Su Buletinling straightened his clothes, walked closer and raised his hands to make a scholarly salute. "Good morning, Miss Zhong." Zhongju turned around, smiled, and bowed. "Master Su." Su Buling nodded slightly, and followed Zhongju walking by the lake, thinking about his words. "After returning to the ship yesterday, I tried to detoxify with the secret method I got. The effect is still there. I can't feel it now. But as the girl said, after careful inspection, there is still a little bit left." Zhongju blinked, stretched out his hand and put it on Su Buling's wrist, feeling the pulse carefully. As for how Su Buling detoxified, Zhongju didn't ask. Just from Su Buling's pulse, he could tell that he must have done something that only a man could do last night, and he had done it many times. She researched the method of combining yin and yang. Although she didn't understand how Su Buring knew the solution, it was not impossible to discover it by accident. The only thing she admired was Su Buring's physical strength. After feeling it for a moment, Zhongju nodded. "There are not many left. To completely eliminate the poison, it is just a matter of detoxifying it several times. However, if you want to reunite, you have to carefully nourish and condition it, which is very troublesome. Moreover, Wen Yang's secret method is a secret that is not passed down by the master." "Young master." Su Buling came here just to talk about this, and he chuckled and said, "I was born to be a king. I will definitely not be able to save Dayu by studying medicine, but I have many skills and I am naturally willing to learn if the girl is willing to teach. I probably won't be able to become a doctor in the future, but I can build a school in Suzhou to specialize in medicine. Recruiting students to study medicine will definitely be more useful than having one more doctor in the world, and it won't be a disgrace to the legacy of our master." "School." Zhongju blinked her eyes. She didn't expect that Su Buling's situation was so big. She just wanted to accept a disciple. She hesitated slightly at the moment. This kind of thing that will benefit future generations should not be taken lightly. "Let's talk about it later." "Well, according to the rules of the sect, you can only worship one master. Does the young master have other masters?" Su Buling was stunned. He didn't expect there was such a saying. He was embarrassed. "I have a master, Ning Yuhi. Mrs. Master's sect has such a rule." Zhongju nodded seriously, and her beautiful face showed a little disappointment. "There is indeed such a rule. Since you have a master, it seems that the path of teaching and learning is not feasible. Alas, it is God's will. It's not that I don't want to help. If you have impotence in the future." Su Buling raised his hand and thought for a moment. "Well, miss, can you make some concessions?" "No concessions." Zhongju stood upright in front of Su Buling, with a serious tone. "The rules of the sect are greater than heaven, and cannot be changed at will, but you can't not treat it." "Well, you are so good at martial arts, what can Ning Yuhi teach you?" Su Buling spread his hands. "In fact, I can't teach you anything, but I have already become your disciple." Zhongju shook his head. "Since I can't teach you anything, it's just a name without substance, and it can't be considered a master and apprentice. Ning Yuhi should be a reasonable person. You can become my disciple and break off the master-disciple relationship with her." Su Buling frowned slightly. If he changed his sect and broke off the master-disciple relationship for a little favor, he would be a scum in the world. Moreover, this matter was too hurtful. Even if Ning Yuhi didn't say it, she would feel bad in her heart. She saw everything. Su Buling thought for a while and shook his head. "The relationship must not be broken. Otherwise, I will accept Miss Zhong as my apprentice." "Bah! Oh no, you are joking. I have already become a disciple, how can I take you as my master again?" Zhongju almost showed his foxtail. His face changed several times, and he quickly made a rude look and bowed slightly. Su Buling was also stunned. He didn't expect that the fairy-like Miss Joan would also swear, but this idea was indeed excessive, and it was not her fault. If accepting a disciple is not an option, then the only thing left seems to be. Su Buling blinked his eyes and acted like a handsome gentleman. "May I ask if Miss Zhong is married?" Zhongju frowned immediately and said in a cold voice, "Mr. Su, please pay attention to your identity." Su Buling nodded, feeling a little helpless for a moment. Zhongju observed carefully for a moment, and seeing that Su Buling looked like he would never break off the relationship with Ning Yuhi, he could only settle for the next best thing. In fact, the masters in the martial arts world are divided into guides, entry masters, and teachers. Talented people usually have several masters, but there is only one true master. Since Ning Yuhi didn't teach you anything, at most he is an entry master who gives you some pointers. I can teach you a lot of things, and they are all very useful. Su Buling blinked. What does Miss Zhong mean? Well, it means that I am the master, and I am the master in the external or written records. Since Ning Yuhi has accepted you as a disciple, it is indeed inappropriate to break off the relationship. It is not a conflict to be an entry master. Su Buling blinked. Is this okay? It doesn't break the rules of the sect. Zhongju sighed. Rules are dead, people are alive, and the young master cannot help but save him, so this is the only way. Su Buling naturally had no objection to this, and he stepped back very quickly, ready to raise his hand to salute and call him master. Zhongju also stood up straighter, with a hint of mission accomplished in his eyes. But just at this moment, a guest from the palace came running to the shore, and hurriedly ran up to him and said, "Young prince, I have heard about Ning Yuhi and Zhu Manzi. They seem to have had a conflict with Jingmen No. 1 Zhou Zhenjia in Jingmen. There are rumors that Zhou Zhenjia wants to force Ning Yuhi to marry him." "What?" Su Buling was immediately annoyed when he heard this. Seeing that the guards were anxious, he did not dare to delay and walked quickly to the ship. "Take my horse. I just came to chew. Why are all kinds of monsters and ghosts coming out? They even dare to touch my daughter, master." Huh. Zhongju, who was about to accept an apprentice, was stunned for a moment when he saw Su Buling leaving. After reacting, he showed a bit of annoyance in his eyes. "Why does this vixen always make things difficult for me? Please give me some monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 352. Tap, tap, tap. On the official road in the autumn fields, the horses galloped towards Jingzhou. Su Buling whipped his horse faster, but before he ran far, he heard the sound of horse hooves and a sweet voice behind him, "Mr. Su! Mr. Su!" He looked back and saw Zhongju riding a big red horse and chasing him in a hurry. Su Buling held a long spear in his hand, slowed down his horse a little, and said, "Miss Zhong, I will talk about the apprenticeship in detail when I come back. I will go to Jingmen first." Zhongju ran up to him and advised softly, "Mr. Su, don't be so anxious. Ning Yuhi is not a rookie in the world. Her martial arts are better than mine. She lives at the foot of Wudan Mountain. I went to her house to talk and was driven away. Who dares to marry her by force? The rumors in the world are not to be believed." Su Buling frowned slightly. Thinking about it carefully, it was a bit wrong. He only thought about his naive master and forgot about it. Ning Yuhi is a Quanzhen Taoist priest. He can defeat Zhang Xiang by fighting 4 people alone. Jingmen is hundreds of miles away from Wudan Mountain, and Wudan's killing god Chendaozai is no pushover. Even if the king of Chu wants to marry Ning Yuhi, he has to consider the feelings of the current emperor. Who is so capable and brainless to do this? Thinking of this, Su Buling slowed down his horse, a little puzzled. "I forgot in my anxiety just now, rumors will not start without wind, let's go and take a look." Zhongju walked beside Su Buling and shook his head and said, "Don't worry, young master. Since you have heard the news, Wuodane Mountain has heard it long ago. Ningyuhe is protected by Wuodane. If this really happened, the group of old monsters on Wuodane Mountain would have come to the door long ago. Why would you need to travel a long distance to run there?" Su Buling did not stop his horse. "Don't be afraid of 10,000, just be afraid of one. Ningyuhe is my master. I have to go there no matter what after hearing the news about her. Go there early to avoid mistakes." Zhongju's eyebrows showed a bit of anxiety. Her position as the top 8 was taken away by Ningyuhe. She went to Ningyuhe's house and had a grudge with him for a long time. If she met Ningyuhe and told him everything that happened in the past, she would definitely not be able to snatch him as her apprentice. But at this moment, there was no excuse to stop Su Buling. The 2 horses were galloping on the pipeline. After Su Buling met a tea house where many people from the underworld gathered on the road, he got off the horse and asked the well-informed tea house owner about it. He learned that the rumor was that Jingmen's number 1 Zhou Zhenjie forced the former world's number 1 beauty to marry, and the 2 sides had a conflict. The details were not clear. After carefully asking about Zhou Zhenjie's background, he was told that he was a local snake in Gukan County, Jingmen, with more than a dozen ships under his command, and he was rampant in the local area. After understanding the situation, Su Buling felt a little relieved. Zhongju followed behind, hesitated for a moment, and said softly, "He is just a ruffian in a small town. It must be a misunderstanding in the martial arts world. Mr. Su, don't be so anxious." Su Buling nodded. "Anyway, we are on the road. Gukan County is only about 100 miles away. We will arrive in the afternoon." Zhongju was a little anxious, but he didn't want to show it. After thinking about it, he simply took out a small bottle from his arms and handed it to Su Buling. "This is the elixir I made on weekdays. It can cure all poisons in the world. There is an entry gift for apprenticeship. I hope you don't despise it." Su Buling blinked his eyes and wanted to raise his head. He took it with his hand, but changed his mind and shook his head and said, "I have heard about Master, so I have to ask her opinion on this matter. Don't worry, Miss Zhong. You two were both helpless back then. Wuodane meddled in other people's business and kicked you out. It has nothing to do with Master. Master has a good temper and will definitely agree to this." Zhongju bit his lower lip. Seeing that he couldn't make things a done deal, he could only chuckle and said, "Mr. Su, I was young and angry back then, so my behavior was indeed inappropriate, and there were many misunderstandings. I'm afraid your master doesn't like me very much. No, I have come to terms with it now and feel sorry for what happened back then. If she blames me, please say a few good words for me. Don't worry, Miss Zhong. Although we have only known each other for a short time, I know Miss Zhong well. The misunderstanding back then was resolved naturally with my mediation. Alas, everyone is young and ignorant. If Ningyuhe says something to me, let me explain it and don't just believe it." Su Buling listened for a moment and felt something was wrong. He turned his head. "Miss Zhong, what misunderstanding did you have with Master back then?" Zhongju hooked the hair by her ear, made a calm face of everything is over, and shook her head. "Young people, it's nothing but fighting. In fact, it's nothing. I'm not the kind of bad-hearted woman, and I really want to help you." Su Buling nodded, always feeling that Zhongju became a little strange, but he didn't know why, so he didn't ask much at the moment, and rushed to Gukan County at full speed. Gukan County is located along the Danjiang River. It is the intersection of Yueyang, Jingmen, Xiangyang and other cities. It is a port for land and water. Winter is coming soon. Gukan County is crowded with carriages and horses, and porters are carrying sacks to load and unload goods at the dock. Many Jianghu people who heard the news wandered outside Yongfen warehouse in the town, and some even climbed up the wall to look at the scene inside. Yongfeng Warehouse is a warehouse where goods transported by merchants circulate and are then sent to all parts of the world by fleets. The owners behind the fleet and Yongfeng Warehouse are the Zhou family, a wealthy family in the town. The head of the family, Zhou Zhenjie, was born a ruffian with connections in both the black and white worlds. He was famous for his fierce fists in Jingmen. He struggled in the market for half his life and built up his current family business. He was respected as the best in Jingmen by friends from all over the world. Of course Zhou Zhenjie has some kung fu, but next to him are the Yueyang Cao family, Hudishan Lin family, Wudane Mountain, and other behemoths in the world. Even if he is said to be powerful, he cannot really be the best. The main reason for being able to defeat both black and white is the government's filial piety is in place. Zhou Zhenjie was able to build such a big business, so he was certainly not a reckless man. He usually knew how to behave and did not offend those who should not be offended. An Wen has been living in Gukan County for half his life, and has never had any problems. The knights in the world do not dare to provoke anyone related to the government. But if you often walk by the river, your shoes won't get wet. Zhou Zhenjie didn't mess with people he shouldn't mess with, but he still underestimated the dangers of Jianghu. In the afternoon, in the courtyard of Yangfengkang, about 30 thugs squatted on the ground with their heads in their hands. Zhou Zhenjie, dressed as the leader, looked at the little girl in front of him with a bald head and an aggrieved face. "Auntie, I'm just saying casually, why are you so stubborn? The goods in this warehouse cost hundreds of taels of silver if they are left alone for one day." Snap! The small wooden stick hit Guangming's head, and Zhou Zhenjie shrank his neck. He dared not speak out in anger. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 353. In the courtyard filled with goods, Zhu Manzi, wearing a floral dress, walked around in front of dozens of ruffians with her hands on her waist, acting like a wolf guard. Do you know what I used to do? A wolf guard of the Tianzi camp. Have you heard of Zhangxiang, the massacre of 10,000 people? That was my direct superior, the loyal and brave Marquis Li family, right? That was a case I handled personally. I didn't even look at you guys in Chang'an before. Who gave you the courage? Auntie, you came here without announcing your family background. How would I know? Pa. You can bully others without announcing your family background? Is there still any law? Do you not take Wudane Mountain seriously, or do you not take the current emperor seriously? No, no. Zhou Zhenjie was full of frustration, and felt that he had a point but couldn't explain it. A few days ago, he took his men to the dock to watch the scene, and saw two women looking for a boat to Wudane Mountain. They were dressed like ordinary county girls, but they were as beautiful as flowers, one more beautiful than the other. Zhou Zhenjie had been in Jingmen for so many years, but this was the first time he met such a beautiful girl. Seeing that she was dressed simply and didn't look like a woman from a wealthy family, he naturally had evil thoughts and went up to greet her politely. Zhou Zhenjie was also a well-known figure in Jingmen. It was a blessing for a poor family to be his concubine. He thought that he could win the beauty by saying a few nice words, but he didn't know that the two women had a bad temper. Not only did they not agree, they also said that he was wishful thinking. Zhou Zhenjie got angry at the time and asked the younger brothers to surround the people and threaten them. As a result, more than a dozen younger brothers and himself were beaten down by the older women. It was normal to be beaten for misjudgment in the rivers and lakes, but he didn't expect that these two female demons would blackmail him, tied him and his brothers and threw them in the warehouse yard, not allowing them to unload or load goods. Zhou Zhenjie was angry, so he asked someone to call the county magistrate to make a decision for him. As a result, he found out that the other party was Gu Qiu Jinren from Wudang Mountain, the one who escaped the emperor's marriage 10 years ago. Even the king of Chu avoided her to avoid the misunderstanding of the current emperor. She was a real female Tai Sui. That's fine, but the key is that Ning Yuhe was unreasonable and even filed a complaint, asking the government to make a decision for her. How can the county magistrate make a decision? The woman that the emperor didn't marry, now a blind toad, wants to eat swan meat. If he is partial, the memorial may arrive in the imperial study in a few days. For the sake of his official hat, the county magistrate pressed Zhou Zhenjie and beat him with a stick, and then slipped away and didn't care about it. Zhou Zhenjie knew that he had offended the wrong people and wanted to admit his fault, but it was easier to ask for help than to send him away. The two ladies refused to give him money and refused to listen to his good words. They just detained him here and did not allow him to do business. The little girl in front of him carried De Yulu on her back from morning to night, and was beaten if she talked back. She had not meant to leave for 7 or 8 days. The surrounding boat gangs and people from the underworld ran to the outside of the courtyard wall every day to watch the joke. I don't know where this stupid thing has spread. Winter is coming, which is the peak season for freight. Every day, the goods are pressed out and not in. The loss of silver makes Zhou Zhenjie's heart bleed. Seeing that it was afternoon again, he couldn't help but. And, just tell me what you want. If you detain it like this, the grain cannot be transported out and people will starve to death. Can the porcelain and tea you transport be eaten as food? Stay here honestly. Zhu Manzi picked up the small wooden stick and knocked again. He was dry-mouthed and turned back to the account office of Yongfeng warehouse. The accountant carefully sat at the table pretending to be dead, while Ning Yuhe, dressed as a village girl, sat on the armchair and drank tea slowly. Zhu Manzi sat on the big animal skin chair next to him, dangling her legs in the air, a little bored. Ning, it's been 7 or 8 days, the news is probably about to reach Zhejiang. Xiao Ning should have heard the news a long time ago, why hasn't she come yet? Ning Yuhe sighed softly. If King Yi was in Chu, she would have come here after hearing the news from me. She hasn't shown up yet, maybe she doesn't want to come. It's said in the martial arts world that De Yinglu is going to Cao's house. King Yi has a feud with De Yinglu, and I'm afraid she will take the initiative to hide in Cao's house. Zhu Manzi taught a few Tian rupee, who was excited about doing good deeds at first, is now a little fed up. How long do we have to wait? There is no point in dealing with these people. Ning Yuhe chuckled, just treat it as getting rid of harm for the people. These rascals don't learn their lesson after a beating, and it's like cutting meat when they lose money. Wait 2 more days, and when they feel the pain, they will naturally behave themselves. Zhu Manzi nodded, looked at the setting sun outside the window, thought about it, and missed Su Buling again. I'm also thinking about going to Suzhou this year. The road is not easy to travel in winter, and now it seems that we can't go. How about we go together tomorrow when spring comes? Mr. Su must miss Sister Ning. Ning Yuhe's eyebrows curved. I miss Ling too, and I don't know how his injury is recovering. When King Yi is found, we will go together. I told Ling before that he would build a small Taoist temple for me in Suzhou, and we will live there in the future. It's a bit embarrassing to always stay in Wudang Mountain. Zhu Manzi thought carefully. I heard that Suzhou is in the desert, and there are mountains. The Taoist temple doesn't have to be built on a mountain. Didn't he say that there is a big flower sea at home? Let's build it in the flower sea. Hee, I heard there is a big bed, 10 people can sleep in it without being crowded. Big bed. Ning Yuhe frowned and thought for a while. Then don't build it in the flower sea, just find a random place. While chatting, a shout suddenly came from the warehouse yard outside the account office. Who is Zhou Zhenjie? My brother is, a hero, spare my life. Zhu Manzi and Ning Yuhe were both shocked when they heard this clear voice, and they were a little bit unbelievable. After just a moment of hesitation, there was the sound of fists hitting flesh outside, and the man's extremely terrified wailing. "Ah, who are you? Ah, who did I offend?" Zhu Manzi was full of surprise and ran to the outside of the account office in disbelief. When she looked up, she saw the young man in white who had been haunting her for several months standing in the courtyard. "Mr. Su!" Zhu Manzi screamed and ran out like crazy to pounce on Su Buling. Ning Yuhi was startled and flashed to Su Buling, grabbing Su Buling who was beating Zhou Zhenjie. "Stop, I've beaten him." Su Buling had already inquired about the news, so he used his fists, otherwise he would have killed someone long ago. After seeing Manzi and Ning Yuhi, he stopped, turned around to catch the little Manzi who rushed over, picked her up and turned around, and chuckled. "Master, Manzi, why are you not staying in the dojo, why are you here?" Ning Yuhi seemed to have forgotten about the white steamed buns. She smiled gently and was about to say a few words to Su Buling. When she looked up, she saw a charming woman in a water blue dress standing behind Su Buling. Her fox-like eyes looked away, trying to pretend that she didn't exist. "Ye Juniang?" Ning Yuhi was shocked, and the smile on his face disappeared immediately. He looked around, picked up the stick from the ground, and strode over. Tomorrow's update may be later. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 354. In the courtyard of Yangfengkang, about 30 gangsters were squatting on the ground with their heads in their hands, silently. Zhu Manzi's big eyes were full of excitement. He buried his face in Su Buling's chest and rubbed it, is incoherent. Su Buling must have missed the pistachio branches. He held his round face in his hands and was about to take a few sips when he saw the master, who had always been as gentle as water, picking up the small wooden stick on the ground and walking towards him with murderous intent. Behind. Su Buling thought something was going on, so he looked back, only to see Zhongju, who was following him, had wide-eyed fox eyes, his hands curled up on his chest and his face full of fear, looking at him pitifully. "I'm going to." Su Buling felt anxious and quickly let go of Xiao Manzi, ran over and grabbed the stick that master was about to hit, and said urgently, "Master, what are you doing?" After Zhu Manzi discovered the situation, he hurriedly ran into the house, picked up the small bowl of melon seeds, and sat on the bench under the eaves, staring intently. Ning Yuhi was obviously really angry. He looked at the apprentice who was standing in front of him. "Your Majesty, get out of the way." Zhongju did not hide or evade, but just stood there with guilt in his eye circles red. "Mr. Su, let her fight. It was my fault in the past that I let her vent her anger." "You." Ning Yuhi, who was originally as gentle as water and made people feel like a spring breeze, was now full of anger. When Su Buling grabbed the stick, he raised his finger to pretend to be pitiful Zhongju. "Ye Juniang. Do you still have the nerve to pretend to be wronged?" Su Buling didn't hear Ye Juniang's confusion, but he still stopped the angry-faced master and said with a pleasant expression, "Don't get excited. I've heard everything about what happened to you back then. It was all a small misunderstanding." Small misunderstanding. When Ning Yuhi saw that Su Buling was actually protecting the other party, it was like a young daughter-in-law catching an adulterer and finding her husband talking to the vixen. Their eye circles suddenly turned red. They looked at Su Buling and asked, "Ling why are you with her? She is very good at deceiving people. Not one of her 10 words is true. She is just a scumbag." Zhongju didn't reply when she was scolded like this. She just sobbed twice, "Mr. Su, just let her scold me. I'll be fine." You dash. When Ning Yuhi saw that the other party was still pretending to be pitiful, he didn't care about his ladylike demeanor and immediately rushed over to take action. Su Buling had a good impression of Zhongju, and he followed him here. He definitely couldn't let his master beat him up, so he hugged his master's waist and pulled him back with all his strength. Seeing both women crying, he didn't dare to say harsh words, so he could only offer kind words. Master, calm down. There are many people here. Let's find a secluded place to sit down and chat slowly. Ningyu he didn't know how much grievance he had suffered in the past. He didn't even care about being held in his arms by his apprentice. He just stared at Zhongju. Get out of here. If I see you again, I will break your legs. Zhongju was timid, and said softly, Yu-he, I was young and ignorant back then. Are you worthy of calling me by my name? Noisy and chattering. Su Buletinling felt his head was heavy, and he quickly waved his hand to Manjier to stop watching the show and lead the way to a secluded place to smooth things over. Zhu Manzi then ran over and helped comfort Ning Yuhi. Together they left Yangfengkang and found a stone pavilion along the Danjiang River to sit down and talk. In the small stone pavilion, Zhongju and Ningyu sat together at both ends, and Su Buling stood in the middle to prevent the angry master from beating Miss Zhong to death. Zhu Manzi, with a face full of sadness, sat next to Ning Yuhi and offered kind words. Sister Daning, please calm down, that girl doesn't look like a sinner. After the initial excitement, Ning Yuhi's mood stabilized a bit now. He looked at the ignorant apprentice and said seriously. Ling you must never be deceived by her. Drive her away now. You can't believe a word she says. Zhongju looked a little ashamed, sighed quietly, and stood up. Well, since Miss Ning doesn't want to see me so much, I'd better go. Su Buletinling was caught in the middle and naturally wanted to resolve the gap. He raised his hand to let Zhongju sit down and looked at Ning Yuhi. Master, what misunderstanding do you have? Miss Zhong does not look like a person with evil intentions. Even though she behaved inappropriately when she was young, she now understands the truth and feels guilty. She feels guilty. Ning Yuhi saw that Su Buling was obsessed with beauty and said coldly, don't look at her appearance, she has a dark heart and is full of evil. Zhongju twitched the hair beside his ears, a little innocently, it's all in the past, Yuhi, please calm down. Ning Yuhi was too lazy to talk to Zhongju, so he held Su Buling's hand and said seriously. Ling do you know what she did back then? Su Buling shook his head, what's the matter? Ning Yuhi thought for a while before starting to talk about Zhongju's many evil deeds back then. In those days, Su Danking was very famous for his paintings of beauties all over the world. Many women came to ask for paintings. Su Danking was a scholar, and when he painted beauties, he didn't just focus on their faces. He could only paint them if they were both beautiful, intelligent, talented, and beautiful. But among them there was a man named Yeju. This mother-in-law woman has no self-awareness at all. She is chasing her everywhere and forcing Su Danking to paint her. Moreover, he cannot paint just one picture of her. After painting her, he must not paint anyone else, and his evaluation must be higher than others. Zhongju's face turned red, but he did not deny it. I didn't go to Su Danking, it was Su Danking who met me. I was young at the time, so I made a small request, but it was negotiable. He just stopped painting, and then that's why I'm angry. Ning Yuhi snorted coldly, Su Danking met you? How come you, a wild girl who grew up in the ravines of Nanyu, met Su Danking by chance in Daio's Imperial College? Do you dare to say that you didn't meet Su Danking on purpose? Zhongju sighed, traveling in the world means running around. I am in awe of the Central Plains culture, so what if I go to the Imperial College to see? Su Buling blinked, thought for a moment, and nodded, even if you really go to Su Danking, it won't be a problem. There are still many girls looking for Su Danking. Ning Yuhi frowned slightly, whether you go to find her or make that ridiculous and rude request, Su Danking felt that she was too utilitarian and didn't want to paint, so she got angry and chased Su Danking all over the world. If she couldn't say soft words, she would come. Seriously, poison Su Danking and won't give him the antidote if he doesn't agree. Do you think this is a human thing? Well. Su Buling blinked. In fact, he couldn't comment on it, because Xiang'er had also threatened and intimidated her before snatching away Miss Xiao's bagui. Zhongju sighed faintly. I told you that I was young and ignorant at that time, and all the literati were arrogant, so I just tried to scare Su Danking, who knew he was so cowardly. A person cannot stand without faith. If he didn't want to paint, he should rather die than surrender. I won't really poison him to death. Pooh dash. Ningyu, he looked coldly. You still have the nerve to say it? You are already poisoned, how can you not agree if he doesn't agree? You used dirty means to force Su Danking to agree to paint for you, and you blame him for not keeping his word. Zhongju was also a little aggrieved. When I saw his promise, I detoxified him, and then he vowed to paint for me, and according to the rules, I had to buy him a bottle of wine. I believed him at the time and ran all the way to Chang'an to give it to him. I bought a bottle of wine, and then he went to draw you and then sealed it. This should be his fault, right? Su Buling combed his hair and turned his head. If this is really the case, we can't blame Su Danking for not keeping his word. I don't blame him, Zhongju said with a bit of guilt on his face. I was young and ignorant at the time, and I really lacked consideration. Su Buling nodded. Master, knowing your mistakes can make a lot of improvements. Will she realize her mistake? Ning Yuhi's face was cold and he continued, she is just a messy shrew. Even if Su Danking had no choice but to lie to her, she should go to Su Danking to cause trouble. What does it have to do with me? Su Buling sat in front of Ning Yuhi and said softly, it must have nothing to do with Master, and she doesn't blame you. Ning Yuhi was angry and annoyed. Do you believe her nonsense? At that time, Su Danking finished painting me and closed the book. She couldn't find Su Danking's person, so she came to trouble me, saying that I had robbed her. Bakui's position. I was a young lady in the Tang family, but she didn't dare to come over. But something happened and I was exiled to Changqingguan, so she came over. Zhongju pursed her lips. I just want to talk to you. You call that a heart-to-heart talk? Ningyu was in a hurry, holding Su Buling's hand, her eyes full of annoyance. At that time, King Yi and I were dependent on each other. After she found Changqingguan, she came to ask me why I stole her bakui. I explained to her, but she still refused to listen and insisted on me telling the world, saying, I am a monk anyway. It's not as good as her. Let her be the #1 person in the world. It's a good thing that I didn't hit her. Su Buling frowned and looked at Zhongju. Zhongju's eyes were filled with shame. It's true. I was only 16 or 17 at the time, and there was something wrong with my words. It's not just your words that are inappropriate. Ningyu, he gritted his teeth like an aggrieved daughter-in-law complaining to her husband. I didn't have the mind to talk to her at that time, so she started to be mischievous, knocking on the door during the day and night, and not letting King Yi and I rest. I went to beat her and she ran away, and when I came back she showed up again. King Yi was only 8 years old at the time, and she was so angry that she couldn't eat. It didn't matter, after a few months she got used to it, and she started to change her tricks, attracting a lot of people. Snakes, insects, rats, and ants surrounded the Taoist temple, scaring me and King Yi so much that we didn't even dare to sleep, and even poisoned the pool. Zhongju raised his hand hurriedly, don't slander anyone. It's not poisonous. It's just itching powder. Who asked you to take a wild bath? Ba, you still have the nerve to explain. Ning Yuhi's eyes were full of annoyance. I couldn't eat or sleep well at that time, so I struggled for a while. At first, I didn't want to trouble the senior Wudane, but she kept harassing me. I had no choice but to ask the senior Wudane to help. At first it was Master Kingxiu who came over to reason with her and persuade her not to persist in her stubbornness. But she still didn't know what was wrong and said that she didn't kill people or set fire. Changqing Mountain was not built by Wudane. She lived in Changqing Mountain and raised insects and birds. What happened to Wu Dame? Almost made the young master Kingxiu angry to death, and then Chen Daizai came over and expelled her from the Central Plains arena. Well. Su Buletinling's eyes were filled with astonishment. He raised his hand and rubbed his forehead. He looked at Zhongju, not knowing how to evaluate it. Such a fairy-like girl was too naughty when she was young. Zhongju waited for Ning Yuhi to finish speaking, and then sighed quietly. I knew it was wrong to fight for the name at the time, but now I have thought about it and put down the false reputation long ago. Ning Yuhi didn't believe it at all. Now that you've let it go, what are you doing back to the Central Plains? Why are you getting close to your child? Zhongju twitched her hair beside her ears. I am originally a traveler. It is normal for me to travel north and south. I also happened to meet Mr. Su. I know some medical skills, so I thought of passing on the mantle. Ning Yuhi frowned slightly, and after thinking about it for a while, he understood. Haha, you had a good idea. You couldn't grab the 8th leader, and now you come here to grab the apprentice. Zhongju looked serious and sat up a little straighter. Ning Yuhi, when I met young Master Su, I didn't know that you were his master. If you don't believe me, ask young Master Su, why did you ask me to steal your apprentice? It's not like I didn't know that you were his master. Disciple, I am more powerful than your disciple Ning Qingyi, why should I fight with you? Su Buling blinked, as if he understood why Zhongju suddenly appeared in front of him, and was eager to accept him as his disciple. After thinking for a moment, Su Buling chuckled and said, Miss Zhong is also from South Vietnam, does she know the newly promoted 8th leader Zhongli Chuchu? Ning Yuhi thought for a moment, then frowned slightly. Her name is Zhongli Juju. Su Buling was a little confused. Zhongli Juju's identity was revealed, but there was nothing strange in his eyes, and he nodded slightly. Chu was brought out by me. She started to wander the world on her own 2 years ago. She also gained the reputation of Ba Kuei herself. I have devoted myself to teaching my apprentices to save lives and heal the wounded, and I have long since given up on competing with you. Ning Yuhi always felt that something was wrong, but she naturally didn't expect that Zhongli and Juju would even compete with his apprentices, and if they couldn't compete, they would fight for love. Seeing that Zhongli Juju's conversation was very different from the past, and he didn't argue with her, Ning Yuhi was dubious and snorted lightly. As long as you figure it out, but you already have an apprentice, why do you want to accept your order as your apprentice? Zhongli Juju looked calm. I have something that I can teach, so I can naturally accept disciples to teach me. It is only natural that you and I will look to all corners of the world. Do you want to take care of this? Ning Yuhi frowned for a moment, then turned to Su Buling. Ling are you really ready to accept her as your teacher? Su Buling chuckled lightly. There are some residues of the locking dragon goo, and it is difficult for the body to recover as before. Miss Zhong knows the method of warmth and nourishment, which can only be taught by becoming a master, so. Ning Yuhi frowned. Listen to her nonsense, she is just a poisonous woman from the Miao border. Where did she come from? Zhongli Juju saw Ning Yuhi directly destroying the situation, and immediately became anxious. Ning Yuhi, I have been traveling around the world for so many years, and I have a problem with an expert master? What's wrong with the rules of the master? I am also doing it for Mr. Su's good, what should I say? Like I want to harm him. Ning Yuhi snorted lightly. It's easy to change a country's nature, but it's hard to change its nature. You should help my son to warm up his body first. If it is true, then we can talk about becoming a disciple. Zhongli Juju stood up and said, the laws of our ancestors are immutable. In the worst case, we just don't save him. It's not me who is anxious, he said and left. Su Buling was a little helpless, and just as he was about to speak to dissuade him, Ning Yuhi pulled Su Buling back. You let her go. Zhongli Juju paused, then turned around. "That's all, it's Mr. Su that I want to help, not you. If you complain, just complain. I'll just stay away from you in the future." Ning Yu he didn't believe in Zhonglijiju's reformation at all, but Su Buling kept Zhonglijiju, and she couldn't force him to evict her, so she could only keep it in mind and stop talking for the time being. The scene finally stabilized. Su Buling secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He pulled Man Zhi'er, who had watched the show for a long time, and chuckled. "It's all trivial. There's no need to be so angry. Let's talk about it when we get back." When Zhonglijiju saw that Ning Yu refused to let her go, she was secretly relieved. It would not be a day's work to seize the apprentice. As long as this hurdle is passed, there will be opportunities. He was not in a hurry at the moment, bowed to Su Buling Yingying, then turned around and left the pavilion. The four of them got on their horses. Ning Yu he walked beside Su Buling. He ignored Zhonglijiju and asked, "Ling when did you come here? Do you have any news about King Yi?" "I haven't found anyone from King Yi for several months since I came back." Su Buling shook his head, "I just arrived and haven't inquired about it yet." Zhu Manzi walked on the other side and answered, "Sister Daning said that Xiao Ning may be at Cao's house in Yueyang. Why don't we go there together and have a look? We can still catch up on eating crabs now, but if it is later, we may not be able to." Su Buling raised his head and looked up. "It's too late. The boat is parked at the foot of Wudang Mountain. Let's find an inn here to rest for the night. We will return to the boat tomorrow and then we will go to Yueyang together." Zhu Manzi nodded and asked curiously, "Is the young master going out to the world this time?" "No, I'm going to Jiangnan to propose marriage." Zhu Manzi's happy little face froze. "The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 355. Under the same night, Huainan County, thousands of miles away. Huainan has been known as the throat of Zhongzhou and the barrier of Jiangnan since ancient times. Jiangnan is richest in the world, and there are many wealthy families among them. The most prominent among them is the Xiao family of Huainan, which has been passed down for thousands of years. At the transition between autumn and winter, the Huaihe River is still spring-like all year round with a bit of warmth. The entire Huainan County is the territory of the Xiao family, and the ancestral home of the Xiao family is built in the countryside, close to the river, surrounded by thousands of hectares of fertile farmland, with well-structured buildings located in it. The family education is very strict, and there are no bright lights or music at night. In Dawden's scene, one could only occasionally see the young master reading at night from the window of the pavilion. Fastest update PC version : There is a large house deep in the Xiao family village, where the direct descendants of the Xiao family live. It occupies a large area, but because the incense has faded, there are not many people inside, and most of them are servants. Between the two stone lions at the gate, the eldest son Xiao Tingxiao, who had just been called back from the capital, was wearing a scholar's robe and looking at the west like a watchman's stone. He had been staring at the west for several days. The little maid ran out rubbing her eyes and tried to dissuade Xiao Ting from behind. "Sir, please go back. It's already so late. When the lights out time comes, if you are not in bed, you will be punished to copy books again." Xiao Ting held the folding fan tightly, his eyes filled with sadness. "Why is uncle walking so slowly? I'm already here, uncle, why hasn't he come over yet? I'm really anxious." The little maid sighed, "Master, don't talk nonsense. If the master of the house hears it, you will be in trouble. Am I not miserable enough?" Xiao Ting raised his hand and wanted to curse a few words, but he didn't dare to speak. Originally, as soon as Su Buling left, Xiao Ting became the number one dandy in the capital. Apart from the emperor, he was the biggest. He could do whatever he wanted without fear of being beaten. The result was good. Just a few days after he was free and unrestrained, a letter suddenly came and called him back to his hometown in Huainan. Xiaoting experienced the Xiao family tradition and filial sons under the stick for the first time since he was a child. In the past, his father was too lazy to beat him, but his eldest aunt Xiaoqi really dared to do it. Yu has written more words than he has written in more than 10 years combined. Xiaoting's only thought now is that Su Buling should come over quickly and marry Xiaoqi. He can call her ancestor instead of uncle. It's a pity that Su Buling came here as fast as a tortoise. Xiaoting watched him 3 times a day in the morning, noon, and evening, and he was almost 1,000 miles away from Chudi to drag him away. On the other side, in the meeting hall in the middle of Xiao Mansion, Xiaoqi was wearing a long black dress. Her hair was still tied up in a style that had not left the cabinet, and her brows had as always a hint of lightness and clarity of worldly affairs. Hua Jingting, the chief steward, was sitting on the Taishi chair on the side, talking about the news that had come recently. If the spy's news is correct, Zulu has already entered Daying Tower and is currently walking around Chu. The purpose is probably for the string of sword spikes in the Cao family's hands. Sitting in the meeting hall were the Xiao family's staff and uncles. It was considered a small meeting held every day in the family. Xiaoqi sat on the main seat and said in a calm voice, "The Book of Tongtian is a rumor in the world. It is impossible for people like Zulu to believe in the saying of invulnerability, flight, and ascension. Dainglu will not go to war for a book left by the previous dynasty. Collect 4 pieces. The jade may have another purpose. The origin of Daying Tower is very clear. The purpose must be to light a spark in the world. However, it is difficult for one Li Hanzhong to grow to the current scale in a short time. I am afraid there is support from a chaebol or a big family. It seems that the only ones who are likely to rebel at the moment are those of King Su's lineage. Prince Su's crown prince has also arrived in Chu. Is it possible that..." Xiaoqi's face changed slightly, and her cold brows showed a bit of displeasure. If the vassal king wants to rebel, why rely on a few Jianghu forces? Everyone thought about it. Xiao Mo, the head of the second room, was Xiaoqi's uncle. At this time, he said softly, "Xiaoqi, King Su suddenly proposed a marriage with the Xiao family and asked his son to propose marriage directly without any prior consultation. When King Su opened his mouth, the Holy Emperor would naturally not say anything, but the marriage between the Xiao and Su families was not a small matter. Logically it should be a little taboo, but if you refuse, Prince Su will be offended to death. Su Buling is not yet married, and he is also an outstanding person of his generation. It is very suitable to marry you. We discussed it with each other, and it would be a pity to refuse. It depends on what you mean." Xiaoqi's expression was calm, but her hands under the table were clenched tightly. She remained silent for a while and said softly, "I'm thinking about the pros and cons of this matter. It's getting late. Everyone, please go back and rest." Seeing that Xiaoqi still refused to give her the right answer, everyone couldn't say anything at the moment. After getting up and saying goodbye, they walked out one after another. In the quiet night of the meeting hall, Xiaoqi sat alone behind the desk. After everyone disappeared, her brows showed a bit of shame, anger, and aggrievedness. The last time Su Buling broke the overall situation laid out by the emperor, Xiaoqi was originally shocked, but she looked at Su Buling with admiration and felt sorry for him. "When I was trying to pack away my sister's relics, I found a small note in the box containing the dirty things." Xiaoqi took out a small piece of paper from her arms that she had crumpled countless times. Looking at the words goodbye, miss on it and the weird smiling face behind it, she couldn't help but crumpled the paper into a ball again. "Son," dropped on the ground. Xiaoqi's mind is different from ordinary people's intelligence. When she saw the sentence specially reserved for her, she naturally understood a lot of things. Su Buling had recognized her that night and knew that she was not Xiang Er. They were all acting stupid afterwards, pretending not to notice. Xiao Qi became so angry that she felt dizzy when she thought about how she was acting so hard to cover up. Now that you've discovered it, why do you still touch her? Fastest update mobile version. He was licked from head to toe, the look was simply. Xiao Qi hugged her arms tightly. If she hadn't been unable to die, she would have hit her head against a pillar and died. She didn't dare to think about it, but this matter must be sorted out. Could it be that you realized something was wrong after you went in? But he didn't stop at that time. She almost fainted. Xiao Qi thought about it for a long time, but she actually knew that situation. Su Buling would definitely not dare to admit it. He could only confess to her on the eve of leaving Chang'an. Frankly, she pretended it had never happened, so why did she come to propose marriage again out of nowhere? Do you want to be responsible for her? Let's not talk about the issue of sitting in the Xiao family. She is a few years older than Su Buling, and her sister is also in Su Buling's family. How can she marry? Moreover, before Su Buling made up his mind, he didn't even have the intention to discuss it. He just wrote a letter saying, "I'm coming to marry you." Then the boat came over, and no one could refuse him politely. How could he propose marriage like this? Are you sure that I will marry you? Xiao Kitai's temper, which had never changed before, was a little unsteady at this time. She stood up, walked to the small piece of paper, stepped on it, and started pacing back and forth. It was obviously impossible to refuse Su Buling directly. It was obviously impossible for Dayo to go back. Dayo was not named Xiao. How could she stop a vassal prince from coming over? It is even more impossible to agree. She is not Xiang. How can she follow her husband just because they are married? If she really got married, wouldn't the Xiao family really want to hand it over to that idiot Xiao Ting? What to do? Tap tap tap. Footsteps came and went late into the night. Miss Xiao, who has always been a good judge, may have never been so sad in her life. She just hopes that Su Buling will walk slower, and it is best to regret and not come here. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 356. The next day. On Taiji Lake, Xiao Xiang, who had been lying on the bed for a day and a night, finally recovered. He rubbed his waist and walked out of the room. He came to the deck to take a breath. He looked up and saw Mrs. Lu standing like Wang Fushi again. On the bow of the boat, there was a burst of fire in his eyes. Xiao Xiang and Mrs. Lu lived together to prevent Su Buling from messing around. Originally, Mrs. Lu was jealous and kept obstructing Su Buling from touching her. I don't know what kind of ecstasy soup Su Buling drank the day before yesterday, but suddenly she became generous and sent Su Buling directly to her room. She bullied her so hard that she couldn't even remember how she survived until dawn. Regardless, Xiao Xiang just thought it was Mrs. Lu who had changed her temper, but the result was good. Mrs. Lu came over at dawn, still looking like the same jealous person, but Jinner was so yin and yang that he knew she couldn't get up, but he was still laughing at her. At night, they came back to sleep together and said, "What's wrong with you? Let me show you." Xiao Xiang was so angry and ashamed that no one could help her, and she wished she could use a fox's tail to deal with Mrs. Lu. In the past, I took care of Hongluan's feelings and didn't mess around. Now it seems that I have to find an opportunity for Su Buling to deal with Hongluan. Then we will see who laughs at who. Xiao Xiang thought so, walked slowly to the front, frowned and said, "What are you looking at? Are you thinking about it?" Mrs. Lu stood dignified and quiet, and did not turn around when she heard the voice. She just said concerned casually, "Can you stand up? It's not easy. When your son comes back, I will tell him not to be so ungrateful next time. Xiao Xiang'er saw that she kept mentioning this matter, so she gave it up anyway, folded her arms and said calmly, "No, I can bear it, it is detoxification anyway, and it is better to suffer a little bit than some people who can't bear to see it powerful." Mrs. Lu turned around and glanced up and down. "Shameless, who are you talking about? There are others on the boat. Could it be Nightingale?" Xiao Xiang'er snorted, "Who do you think you are? You dreamed about it so late at night that you screamed Ling please don't, you wouldn't have forgotten everything when you woke up, right?" Mrs. Lu stood up a little straighter, with a bit of confusion in her eyes. Just as she was about to think about who this person was, she saw Su Buletinling coming back with a large group of girls on the lake shore. "Why are there two more?" Mrs. Lu immediately forgot all the mess, bit her lower lip and stamped her embroidered shoes. Xiao Xiang'er was also a little dissatisfied. After all, he brought a few girls back from a trip. He didn't take this baby seriously. She looked back and saw that the figure was getting closer, but she saw Ning Yuhi. After Mrs. Lu saw the person clearly, she breathed a sigh of relief. It turns out to be Taoist Ning. "I thought I brought another girl back, the girl next to me must be Manzi. I also want her to be the nanny. What do you think of Xiang'er?" Xiao Xiang'er looked at Mrs. Lu's spectacular skirt from the side and joked. "With such big breasts, who is more suitable to be a nanny than you?" Mrs. Lu's face turned slightly red and she looked down. "How can I be a wet nurse when I'm not pregnant? I really want to take care of your child." Xiao Xiang'er couldn't bear it, so she stopped talking and turned around and returned to the cabin. Mrs. Lu stood on the deck with a graceful manner and welcomed Ning Yuhi on board. She had respected Ning Yuhi before, so she naturally became affectionate now. She pulled Ning Yuhi and started to greet him. Zhongli Jiju has good eyesight and has long seen that Su Buling and Mrs. Lu are very close. If he wants to win the apprentice's heart, he must first capture the apprentice's aunt, and she also joins in to chat about family matters. Ning Yuhi, in front of Mrs. Lu, would naturally not look at Zhongli Jiju coldly, but stood in the middle to prevent her sweet words from deceiving the kind-hearted Mrs. Lu. The three women just walked back to the cabin. After Su Buling arranged for the escort to weigh anchor and set off for Yueyang, he took Zhu Manzi, who had become a little shy, to the study on the second floor of the shipbuilding. Since the sweet moment last night, Zhu Manzi has obviously changed a lot. After all, she is a girl who has just started to fall in love. She is fresh and nervous at the same time. Su Buling understands that it will take 2 or 3 days to adapt before she can return to her former self. Jumping around. The boat slowly left the shore and sailed from Taiji Lake into Danjiang River. Su Buring opened the door to the study room on the second floor. Zhu Manzi was still a little hesitant, as if he was afraid that Su Buring would kiss her again when she was alone. But as soon as I walked in, I saw a skinny little girl, wiping Su Buling's sword back and forth. She had big eyes and a very white face. She smiled brightly when she saw Su Buling. Opening. The master is back. Su Buling walked over and rubbed the girl's head very affectionately. He obviously liked her very much. Zhu Manzi frowned, feeling a bit threatened, but she had even seen such big things as Xiaoning, so she naturally didn't regard the girl in front of her who was obviously not as big as her as a rival, and just asked with a smile. "Mr. Su, who is this?" "Nightingale, my first-in-law girl." Nightingale was a girl with a big heart, so she didn't care at all about this little joke and nodded seriously. "Tongfang." Zhu Manzi looked at the tall Su Buling, and then at the slender little Nightingale. After thinking about it for a while, he frowned slightly. "Mr. Su, how could you do such a thing? She is so shameless." Su Buling didn't expect Zhu Manzi to pay attention to this, which was a little funny. "She is 15 and you are 17. You two are about the same age. Who says it's almost the same?" Zhu Manzi had been a policeman, but he had a strong sense of justice. He ran up to Nightingale and suddenly realized that he was a little shorter than Nightingale. He stood on tiptoes and said, "I am obviously older than her. She has small arms and legs. I guess she doesn't even have the strength to kill a chicken. You are so strong, how can you?" Su Buling sat down on the couch and poured a cup of tea. "Don't underestimate her. She is very powerful. She is well versed in ancient and modern times and has high martial arts skills. She is even more powerful than Xiaoning." Zhu Manzi didn't believe it at all. She looked at Nightingale's thin arms and legs. "Xiaoning is tall. How old is she? She is thinner than me. She is definitely not as powerful as me." Su Buling picked up the teacup and glanced around. "How about a fight? Let's fight. Who is afraid of who? Ning and I have practiced for several months. Our martial arts have improved by leaps and bounds. We are not the same as before. Zhu Manzi has been working hard since she knew that her father was the most fierce bandit in Daewoo. Naturally, she has learned swordsmanship. At this time, in order to show her female knight style in front of her lover, she posed a sword-raising posture with great momentum, and then, the fastest update mobile. Mr. Su, we agreed to stop when we had reached a certain point. Why did she not use any strength at all?" "I didn't use any strength." "You still say you didn't use any strength, but the floor is cracked. You didn't win fairly. Try again." Su Buling drank his tea leisurely, thinking that the long journey on the boat would be much more interesting with a few more girls. Thanks to the big boss Wu Zexian author Shi for the 10,000 yuan reward. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 357. There were no stops along the way, and the journey of hundreds of miles took only 3 days thanks to the rapid river water. When we arrived at Dongting Lake, the rain hadn't stopped yet, and we almost bumped into a boat full of singers and talents, only to realize that we had arrived. It was raining at dusk, and smoke was curling up on the lake. You could see the famous buildings on the shore of the lake in the distance. There were relatively few pedestrians on the street, but it gave off a bit of the charm of the misty Jiangnan. Under the guidance of the boatman, the building boat slowly docked at the shore. The rain was neither heavy nor light, so Mrs. Lu and Xiao Xiang did not go out in the rain to think. They still sat in the house and exchanged skincare tips with Zhongli Jiju. Zhongli Jiju is not just an embroidered pillow in a show. You can see his ability by training Zhongli Chuchu into the 8th leader of Zhaohong. There are all kinds of beauty secrets emerging in an endless stream, from hair care to toes. Listen to the knowledgeable Xiao Xiang was so shocked that even Ning Yuhe, who wanted to find fault, couldn't find any fault. Su Buletinling naturally did not interfere in this matter. After all, women should look after those who please themselves. Zhu Manzi and Nightingale are young, so they are not very interested in these things, but are more interested in crabs. Winter is about to come and we won't be able to eat the most juicy crabs anytime soon. In order not to leave any regrets, Zhu Manzi ran to the deck as soon as the ship docked, and even pulled Ning Yuhe out, and together they went to what Ning Yuhe said last time. A small shop with good quality and low price. Su Buling agreed to go eat crabs with Manzi. There was nothing wrong on the boat, so he took Nightingale and the 4 of them got off the boat together. At dusk, there were few people on the street. Nightingale held an umbrella and walked in front of Su Buling, looking around curiously. Zhu Manzi hid under Ning Yuhe's umbrella and came here once. At this time, he was quite experienced as a tour guide. Ahead is the Yueyang Tower, which is 3 stories high. Next to it is the most famous restaurant in Yueyang, Cyclamen. The owner is Chen Han, the leader of the boat gang. After the Cao family retired from the world, he has the most extensive connections, just like the 4th master of Chang'an, Chen Han. Almost. Su Buling looked at the words and thought for a while. Besides the Cao family, are there any other masters in Yueyang? Well. Zhu Manzi blinked. She was looking for food and really didn't pay attention to this. Nightingale thought about it for a moment, then said. Yueyang is located in the hinterland of the Central Plains. To this day, the 3 religions and 9 streams still gather together, and there are many masters among them. In addition to the Hudishan Lin family who opened the martial arts school, there are also Peng Jiazhuang, Longwan He family, etc. Although they are not considered to be first-class families, they are also small in the world. Fame. In addition, there are also many rangers. The most famous one is probably the gangster ghost lady 10 years ago, who is still on the A-list bounty list of the detective department. Zhu Manzi came from the criminal investigation department, but he had been patrolling the streets from beginning to end. He really didn't remember the list of ruthless gangsters in the Yamen, but he knew the danger level of the gangsters very well. The criminals with rewards in the case library are divided into 3 categories, A, B, and C. There is no need to send out wolf guards for common people to commit crimes. The wanted criminals with C rank are at least officials or those who committed murder and arson. Wu Yu and Shui Yi fall into this category, while the B rank criminals, the extremely difficult gangster, is also the main target of the wolf guard's arrest. Needless to say, those with the rank A were all outlaws who could get up there. Zulu, Li Hansheng, etc. were among them, and there were not many in total. Zhu Manzi was naturally surprised to hear that there was such a number 1 person in Yueyang. A gangster with the rank of A? Isn't that similar to my father? What did that ghost lady do? Nightingale shook her head. She just wrote down the court's arrest document. She didn't know the details. She just said. He killed an official and rebelled. His martial arts skills are extremely high. I didn't catch him anyway. Ningyu, he held a white oil paper umbrella and turned around. I had just arrived in Wudang Mountain at that time. At that time, the world was in chaos. Many Jianghu people rebelled against the court. The Ghost Empress appeared at that time. She stayed anonymous and no one knew who she was. She was assassinating people everywhere in Chu. The wolf guards and officials killed nearly 100 people in just 2 months, and then they went directly to the Prince of Chu's mansion and almost took off the head of the Prince of Chu. Su Buling was slightly surprised when he heard this. As the eldest son of the vassal prince, he naturally understood the vassal prince's family background. Prince Su's mansion was located in the barren western region, and its defense was already exaggerated. However, the 2 wealthy kings, King Chu and King Wu, the vassal king, is naturally only strong but not weak. He dares to rush into the Chu palace to assassinate him, which is not much different from the difficulty of entering the Taiji palace to kill the emperor. Su Buling thought for a while, how come I haven't heard of this person? Ningyu, he sighed. The king of Chu responded to the imperial court's purge of Jianghu people, so he was naturally on guard. At that time, he secretly invited Chen Daizai from Wudang Mountain and Linda from Hudu Mountain to the palace to prevent any unexpected events. The Ghost Empress rashly broke into it. I suffered a big loss. I once heard Chen Daizai talk about one time. He was hit by 3 swords and fled. I'm afraid it hurt his roots. Since then, he has disappeared. Su Buletinling nodded. During the conversation, the 4 of them came to a small shop in the back alley of the market, named Yangji. The shop has been around for some years and was built in a relatively remote back alley. There are only 4 tables in it. A faint aroma comes from the direction of the kitchen, which makes people feel appetite after smelling it. It was raining and there were no customers. The proprietress in a sarong sat at a table by the window and watched the 7 or 8-year-old girl next to her right. The landlady was in her 30s, with a petite figure in Jingchai sarong, and a very soft appearance. When she saw a customer coming in, she stood up with a smile and greeted. It's your first time for some of our guests. Please come in. Although the store is small, it is kept extremely clean and tidy. The little girl who is writing is wearing a skirt and looks very polite. She also stood up and gave her a blessing. Su Buling chose a table with good lighting and sat down, and asked Man Zi to order a few special delicacies. Nightingale was still thinking about the conversation just now and said seriously. The ghost empress met Chendeazai and all the disciples of Prince Chu's mansion, but she escaped with serious injuries. She can indeed be called a tough bandit. Ning Yu he sat on Su Buling's left-hand side, poured tea for the three of them, shook his head and sighed softly. Killing officials is naturally a bandit, but people in the world are not necessarily evil people. Just like Zhu Laojian Sheng and Man Zi's father Zhu Lu, they are naturally gangsters in the eyes of the court, but in the world they are heroes and have integrity. The rules are that you won't kill people without reason, and you won't bully the weak. They are much better than most court officials. Ning Yu he was born in the Jianghu family and was deeply affected by it. He was naturally biased against the imperial court's iron eagle hunting deer. Su Buling thought for a moment. The rules of Jianghu are based on personal morality, but there are not many Jianghu people with high moral character. The law is the bottom line of morality. The court may have done something wrong, but the Daio law is definitely better than the rules of Jianghu can distinguish between good and evil in people. Jianghu is a social environment that is not bound by laws and it is impossible to coexist. In fact, these words are meaningless. Ning Yu he nodded and did not refute Su Buling, but said softly. When Iron Eagle was hunting deer, the emperor ordered to clean up the unruly people in the rivers and lakes. The order was passed down from one level to the next in Chang'an, but it completely changed when it reached the bottom. Many officials relied on their positions to exploit the forces of the rivers and lakes indiscriminately. If you say you are a bandit, you are a bandit. If you dare to say no, you will be confiscated and beheaded. If not, how could the last scene have happened? In my opinion, the Ghost Empress is a knight, murderer, they are all corrupt officials. If it were me, I would still do that. Su Buling thought for a moment. Escape with serious injuries but not dead is considered a good ending. In the small shop, the little girl who was writing saw her mother going to the kitchen and was also lazy to listen. Maybe she didn't understand at this time, so she turned around and asked in a low voice. Is that ghost lady a good person or a bad person? I heard many guests say this. The little girl is very cute, gentle, and quiet, and not very afraid of life. Su Buling looked at it for a few times, tilted his head and chuckled. It's just different positions. There are no good or bad people. My little sister studies hard and will understand when she grows up. Oh. The little girl didn't seem to understand, so she turned back and continued writing. After a while, the landlady came over with a few side dishes and placed them on the table. They were steaming hot, delicious, and delicious. Su Buling and Man Zi Nightingale had no intention of talking about irrelevant things at the moment, so they picked up their chopsticks and started to eat happily. Ning Yu he was a monk and was not a vegetarian. He just ordered a bowl of porridge and sat next to him, serving tea and pouring water. The shop was not big and there were no other customers. Zhu Manzi was not very good at eating crabs. When he saw the proprietress sitting quietly beside him, he pulled her over for advice. The proprietress was very kind and answered all questions. During the chat, she learned that her husband was called Meng Hua, and that her husband worked as the head of a bodyguard agency in Yueyang. He and his 8-year-old daughter ran a small shop to make a living, and the family of 3 was considered a happy family. After all, Su Buling was a man. He did not disturb the women's chat. He just sat next to him as an escort. After a few glasses of wine, Man Zhi'er was seriously studying how to eat crab legs when he suddenly appeared in the rainy back alley. A figure wearing a robe, holding an oil paper umbrella, and an unsheathed iron sword hanging from his waist stood on the roof of a wine shop. Su Buling was picking up the wine glass. After noticing it from the corner of his eye, he turned around to look. but there was no one on the roof of the wine shop in the distance. Instead, there was a middle-aged man sitting at the window of the wine shop, looking at him with a pair of plain eyes. Looking at him. His eyes were as sharp as a sword, hard to look into, but not hostile at all. Su Buring didn't know this person. Seeing that he seemed to be here to find him, he frowned and thought for a while, then asked Ning Yuhi to continue eating with the two girls. He went to the distant place alone on the pretext of buying a bottle of wine. Wine shop. It took a lot of time to write the detailed outline today, so there are only 2 updates. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 358. The sky was getting dark, the lanterns in the shop were lit up, and the dinner party at the wine table next to the window was still going on. Zhu Manzi, with a red face, was drinking with Nightingale with a small wine bowl. The wine is rice wine that can be drunk by my daughter's family. It is very smooth and not strong. However, Nightingale is only 15 years old and does not drink alcohol in the palace. She is really not good at drinking. After 2 sips, her face turned red than the whole tree, and she even pretended to be serious. Appearance, and Manzi guessing. Manzi has been wandering around the market for the past 2 years, and his skills are naturally greater than that of Nightingale. Now he found a place where he could educate his little sister. He was playing so enthusiastically that he didn't even notice that Su Buling had been out for a long time and hadn't come back. Ning Yuhi also took a few sips and sat quietly looking at the 2 childish little girls. Unknowingly, he thought of his apprentice King Yi again. If it were King Yi here, it would be very lively. Ning Yuhi was thinking this and found Su Buling carrying a bottle of wine to the eaves of the shop and closing his umbrella. She stood up, walked out of the shop, stood in front of Su Buling, and asked softly. Ling why have you been gone for so long? There are many kinds of wine, please take a look. Su Buling put away his umbrella and leaned against the wall. Seeing Ning Yuhi's cheeks flushed and drunk, he didn't go in directly and stood outside to sober up and breathe. The autumn rain continued, and the lanterns were swaying under the eaves. Ning Yuhi did not wear a Taoist robe for the convenience of walking. She only wore a simple and elegant white dress, and her hair was tied into a common bun. She looked very ordinary without any makeup, but she was the most beautiful woman in the world after all. In the night light Chiu it looks like it exudes a charm that is hard to describe in words. Different from Xiang'er's bright and charming, Zhongli Jiju's charming, and unlike Entlu's gentle and dignified, Ning Yuhi seems to have no characteristics at first, but after looking at it for a long time, he gradually realized the saying the beauty in the world, the meaning of it's hard to paint. Her eyebrows are clear, her lips are thin, and her teeth are white. She is like a piece of beautiful jade in the hot weather. There is no flaw at all. No matter how you look at it, it is perfect. No matter how you think about it, you can't imagine a better match. The more you look at it, the more it tastes, but you can't tell what it is. So, especially now under the dim light, there are 2 faint blushes on the cheeks, coupled with the faint temperament that is far away from the world of mortals. She is like a fairy who accidentally fell into the mortal world, which makes people want to see but are afraid of blasphemy. Su Buling was originally thinking about Zhu Liu's words, and glanced at him inadvertently, and did not look away again. Ning Yuhi raised his eyes to look at the lanterns under the eaves, and noticed that Su Buling was looking at her side face intently. He didn't pay attention at first, but after a moment of patience, he turned his head. What are you looking at? Su Buring blinked and smiled. Master, what he wears is quite suitable. That robe seems a bit inappropriate. Ning Yuhi lowered his head and glanced. Well. At this point, he remembered his identity again. My teacher is a monk, so I don't care about this. Why do you pay attention to this? While speaking, Ning Yuhi glanced at Su Buling. He must have thought of those unbearable things, and his expression was a bit strange. Su Buling's eyes were pure and innocent, and he turned his head towards the rain curtain, just saying casually. Ning Yu he originally believed that Su Buling was an innocent man, but after discovering Su Buling's collection of belly bands and la hung, he didn't believe it so much. Food and sex are also a matter of taste. A little hobby in the private room is harmless, as long as you behave like a gentleman. After Ning Yu he figured it out, he didn't hate Su Buling, but the impression of innocent thoughts was definitely gone. He felt Su Buling is still a bit lustful. He is a normal young man who is possessive of beautiful women. After Ning Yu he glanced at Su Buling a few times, he straightened his clothes a little, stood up straight, and changed the subject. King Yi still has no whereabouts. You can go to Cao's house with me tomorrow to have a look. Su Buling knew that it was Zulu who came to attack Yinglu, and the Cao family was 100% unstoppable. He must be trying to pull Ning Qingyi back, who was going straight. He nodded immediately, okay. Ning Yuhi's tone and expression were a little unnatural, and he thought for a moment, by the way, Ling what happened to Qingyi when you were in Chang'an? Su Buling blinked and smiled, it's nothing. I saved her once and spent the rest of the time recuperating from her injuries. I haven't seen her many times. Ning Yuhi nodded slightly, thought for a moment, and had nothing to say. In the small shop, the proprietress Meng Hua straightened the flags that had been blown by the wind, and saw the man and woman in white standing under the eaves. The talented man and the woman were very eye-catching. She chuckled and joked. Young master is so lucky to be here. The family members around you are all as beautiful as flowers. You must cherish them. Su Buling didn't talk much at the table. He was talking all over the branches, shouting Miss Daining, little nightingale. Ning Yu he looked like he was only in his 20s, so he was naturally considered to be a rich man who came out with his wife and concubines to play. Ning Yu he wanted to explain, but considering that the master was also a family member, the deliberate explanation would be misunderstood, so he smiled softly, turned around and returned to the store. Su Buling looked at the proprietress in her 30s, of course, it's hard for my sister-in-law to open a store by herself and take care of her children, isn't it? Meng Hua held the wooden basin with a friendly smile, it's better to be tired when you are busy. What's the point of having a safe family? I wish I could live like this for the rest of my life. Su Buling glanced at the uncontested little shop and nodded gently. 2. The Dongting lakeshore outside Yueyang Tower was not much less lively because of the autumn rain. As night fell, the streets and the painted boats on the lake were all lit up. The sound of stringed instruments and the laughter of the drinking guests and singing girls could be heard in the night rain. There were many literati standing on the buildings and singing, showing the elegance of the scholars in Chu. On the boats docked on the shore, many maids stood under the eaves to enjoy the night view of the ancient famous tower. The guests of the royal palace were on guard on the boats, watching the people coming and going on the shore. Inside the boat, in the spacious living room, Mrs. Lu stood at the window and looked at the various people on the lake shore, but her mind was naturally not on the night view. On the table in the living room, there were medicine jars, copper rollers, small scales and other items, and various precious medicinal materials were placed in the exquisite wooden boxes next to them. Xiao Xianger and Zhongli Jiju sat sideways on the stall, grinding medicinal materials carefully according to the prescription for skin and hair care. Zhongli Jiju was born in a mountain village in Nanyu. She was not poor, but medicinal materials were a bottomless pit. Even poisons were expensive, and the required medicinal materials could not be found by just going around the mountains. She nurtured her apprentice Zhongli Chuchu, and over the years, she had emptied Zhongli Jiju's family. Now that she had come to Su Buling's ship, Zhongli Jiju finally understood the background of the aristocratic family. Not to mention Su Buling, just Mrs. Lu, I heard that she knew how to help with beauty, so I casually told the doctor that basically any medicinal materials that could be thought of could be found. Ginseng was used as radish, and Xiao Xiang'er was still worried that it would not be a problem if it was applied on the face because it was not old enough. Zhongli Jiju was able to study the solution to the dragon locking goo, which was obviously very professional. She was afraid of wasting medicinal materials and had to please the two people around Su Buling, so she was very focused and basically didn't speak when she was seriously preparing the formula. Xiao Xiang'er has a wide range of knowledge on strange and ingenious skills. Basically everyone in the Xiao family knows medical skills, so they can do it easily with a little help. However, after working for a long time, Xiao Xiang'er found that Madame Lu was waiting for her husband and taking advantage of the ready-made food. She was a little unhappy. In addition, the pestle in her hand always reminded her of the scene when Su Buling pounded her at night. She felt a little strange, so she put down the pestle and tilted her head and said, "Update fastest PC:/" Hongluan, what are you looking at? Mrs. Lu came back to her senses, looked back, and said in a low voice, "It's raining so hard, why hasn't Linger come back yet?" "How should I know?" Xiao Xiang'er leaned on the soft couch, took a sip of tea. "He is a grown man, so powerful, can he be abducted? If you don't help, go to sleep, you just want to take advantage of the ready-made food." Mrs. Lu couldn't even recognize all the herbs, so she couldn't help. She felt that it was not good to watch others work here, so she turned and walked to the door. "Linger is back, say hello to me." "Okay." Xiao Xiang'er watched Madame Lu leave, sat down for a while, suddenly got up and walked to the door and closed it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 359. In the room, Zhongli Jiju was weighing the medicine. After seeing Xiao Xiang'er's movements, he narrowed his eyes slightly. After 4 or 5 days of contact, Zhongli Jiju knew that Xiao Xiang'er was Su Buling's maiden wife. In layman's terms, she was his concubine. Mrs. Lu was Su Buling's elder, but Xiao Xiang'er and Mrs. Lu were considered sisters. Judging from the words and attitudes of the two people, Xiao Xiang'er seems to still have the upper hand over Mrs. Lu. Zhongli Jiju still doesn't understand what this mess is related to, but the prince's house is already in chaos, so he doesn't make a fuss about it. Her purpose was to accept Su Buletinling as her apprentice, and she had a higher status than Ning Yuhi, so it was enough to know that Mrs. Lu and Xiao Xiang'er could influence Su Buletinling's wishes. Compared to Mrs. Lu, Zhongli Jiju is currently more inclined to have a good relationship with Xiao Xiang'er. After all, there is nothing more powerful than a woman's pillow style. As long as Xiao Xiang'er says a few nice words to her in bed, she will become a disciple. Not easily. Seeing Xiao Xiang'er's sneaky appearance at this time, Zhongli Jiju naturally understood that he wanted to see her for something, so he smiled and asked, "Miss Xiang'er, what's wrong?" Xiao Xiang'er closed the door, walked slowly to the table, glanced at the charming woman opposite, and stopped talking. Xiao Xiang'er is already arrogant, but Mrs. Lu has been laughing at her recently. She can't argue with her and wants to get her back. "I just complained to Su Buling, the stinky brother." Su Buling always made excuses and pushed her around. When she asked an urgent question, he tormented her without making any sense. Xiao Xiang'er knew that Su Buling and Hongluan were just one layer of window paper away, but they both pretended not to expose it, so naturally she felt angry. There is no matchmaking between the left and right, so I can only think of some less serious methods. Anyway, it is for the sake of Su Buling and Hongluan. Thinking of this, Xiao Xiang'er looked at Zhongli Jiju, who was extremely accomplished in medicine, with a three-pointed smile, and whispered, "Miss Zhongli, do you know my relationship with Su Buling?" "Of course I know that Miss Xiang'er has something unspeakable." Zhongli Jiju's expression was very natural, nothing strange at all. Although she was not a doctor in the strict sense, poisons and elixirs were essentially medicines. She often treated people in the South Vietnamese cottage, and she still had the professional ethics of a doctor. Xiao Xiang bit her lower lip, hesitated a little, stood up, walked to Zhongli Jiju and sat down next to her. Well, there's something wrong. I'm a doctor, Miss Yang but it doesn't matter. Xiao Xiang twitched the hair beside her ears and hesitated for a moment. That's all, let's talk to Miss Zhongli directly. Well, it's that kind of thing. Su Buling and I are husband and wife, and we will have sex every few days, but... Zhongli Jiju frowned lightly, his expression a little unnatural. Mr. Su has stopped doing anything malevolent? I've checked my pulse. My kidney energy is sufficient and my blood is strong. It shouldn't be. No. Xiao Xiang bit her lower lip and sighed softly. The reason why he and I are together is more complicated. He has a cold personality. Miss Zhongli should have noticed it. Well, he is relatively dull and has sex. At that time, I always behaved and said nothing, just like it was a routine. Zhongli Jiju nodded lightly. She had no doubt that although she and Su Buling didn't have much contact, she could tell that Su Buling had a cold temperament and didn't eat the fireworks of the world. He didn't even look at any beautiful woman he met, and seemed completely indifferent. Pay attention to a woman's beauty. Most of these men are true gentlemen who are strict with themselves, and treat each other as a guest between husband and wife. They regard sexual intercourse as a matter of obsessive pleasure and perversion. They can only sleep with their wives once a month. Is good. Women are reserved and conservative by nature, so naturally they don't dare to ask for anything, so it's normal to have some complaints secretly. Zhongli Jiju looked at the beautiful woman in front of her who was equally as beautiful as herself and was worried about this. She couldn't help but feel a little regretful in her heart, feeling that she was a waste of natural resources. Su Buling must be blind. Xiao Xiang glanced at Zhongli Jiju and saw that she was listening carefully, and continued. Sigh, I know this is hard to talk about, but I really like him. Between a man and a woman, if nothing else is said, there must be one or two love words. He has always been respectful to each other, and I am a woman, so naturally I am not good either. Mentioning these, I like him, but I don't know what he thinks of me in his heart. Fastest update on mobile phone. Zhongli Jiju sighed, Miss Yang don't worry about this. In my opinion, Mr. Su loves you very much, but he's just not good at words. You see, it's useless, he didn't even say it himself. Xiao Xiang's eyebrows showed a bit of sadness, and she said softly, I just want to ask, Miss Zhongli, if she has the kind of recipe that can make people tell the truth. It is best to make people feel a little, I was a little impulsive, just comparing that in the room. Zhongli Jiju blinked his eyes and thought for a long time before he understood the meaning. Young lady, you mean to let people put down their gentlemanly demeanor and express their feelings and nature? Yes, yes. Xiao Xiang nodded quickly, looking at Zhongli Jiju with a pair of bright almond eyes. Zhongli Jiju blinked and thought for a moment. Generally speaking, it's okay to be drunk. People talk a lot after drinking. They talk about whatever comes to mind. Moreover, their thoughts are slow and they forget their usual images, so that's why it's said that one loses one's temper after drinking, and wine can add to the fun. Xiao Xiang naturally knows that drinking is useful. Last time she was drunk and messed around with Su Buling in front of Mrs. Lu, but it is not easy to get Su Buling and Mrs. Lu drunk at the same time. Miss Zhongli, do you have something that works better than alcohol? Once you take it, you will start talking a lot, and you can't get drunk, you have to stay sober and remember it afterwards. Zhongli Jiju took a breath and thought seriously, this is a bit troublesome. The government used to torture prisoners and studied this method, but if the prisoner is unwilling, it will not work if you are wary and focused. It can only work if you have ideas and let it go. In the end, I found that it is no different from drinking. When you are drunk and in an inappropriate place, you won't talk nonsense. Only when you are happy, you will speak your mind unconsciously. Xiao Xianger thought, he and I are in the boudoir, we are willing, it should work, right? Zhongli Jiju clicked nodding, it should be somewhat useful. I'll make a prescription and try it. As for the comparison, I guess I need to add 2 tonic herbs. Will it not hurt anyone? I don't want to murder my husband. Miss, you're joking. It's just something to liven up the mood. I know my limits. Well, actually, I can't let it go either. I want something that can be used by both men and women. Zhongli Jiju blinked, looked at the shy and beautiful woman in front of him, nodded and chuckled. I understand, you can rest assured, miss. Xiao Xianger nodded gently and looked at the many utensils on the table, then, let's start making it. Now. Yes, what's wrong? Nothing, I'll make it now. Zhongli Jiju's eyes finally became a little weird, and he began to seriously think about the prescription. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 360. The various groups of people in the Jianghu are always the fastest place to spread news. Su Buling's bloody battle with Hudishan Linyuzong in Xi'an village, coupled with the resounding Master Chen, you stinky bull nose on Wudane Mountain, has spread throughout the Chu area. Before the ship arrived in Yueyang, the brothels and taverns where various groups of people gathered had compiled more than a dozen versions of the story. Even Su Buling's roar shattered the plaque of Wudane Patriarch Hall. The young men from all over Chu naturally wanted to compete for the title of King Kui, but seeing that the strongest of the younger generation, Lin Yuzong, spoke so subtle and tactful, they knew that Su Buling was not something that ordinary people could afford to offend, and there was no one who wanted to use Su Buling as a stepping stone to become famous. However, as long as people move around in the Jianghu, they will always be involved in people and things, and there will naturally be people who dare to catch Su Buling's attention. In the afternoon, Su Buling's boat had just arrived at the lakeside outside Yueyang Tower. On the other side of the long street beside the lake, a gathering had just begun in the restaurant Xianwike opened by Chen Han, the leader of the boat gang. Yueyang is located in the Central Plains and in the center of the world's water veins. Shipping is extremely developed. During the peak season, there are nearly 1,000 merchant ships and cargo ships entering and leaving the dock every day. The scale of the boat gang is no less than that of the Jiangnan Chamber of Commerce. Chen Han is the boss of the boat gang. Strictly speaking, he is just a businessman. However, to be able to reach this position, he must be a person who can do both black and white, with connections in all directions and credibility that can convince all parties. The pleasure of revenge belongs to only a few masters who are not short of money. Most people in the rivers and lakes still want to make a living, so middlemen like Chen Ziyi and Chang'an are indispensable. Xianwike is the place where people in the rivers and lakes talk about things. It was raining outside. In a side room behind Xianwike, 8 armchairs were placed. Chen Han, who was wearing a robe and had a big belly, poured a cup of tea for the people sitting there, then walked out of the room and closed the door. In the room, Chang Shijian sat at the head of the room, looking at the 6 or 7 men sitting there, and said directly, I have been recruiting talents in Dainglu for many years. I am in short supply, but I never fill in the numbers with unqualified people. Those who can enter the building must first have a skill and secondly, a letter of surrender. You should have heard of the rumors about the Tongtian treasure book. There is a jade pendant among the 4 jade artifacts in the hands of Su Buling, the prince of Suwang. Su Buling has arrived in Yueyang today. I will arrange for someone to get the jade pendant in a few days, and you will accompany him. You have heard of Su Buling's skills, but you have definitely never seen them. It is unfathomable. If we fail to reach an agreement, it will be a life or death situation. So, I hope you will prepare well. Sitting next to him was a 30-year-old man with a hooked nose and extremely sharp eyes. His name was Yang Tuyu. He was originally the son of the Yang family in Yangzhou. 10 years ago, the entire Yang family died in the Iron Eagle hunting deer, leaving only Yang Tuyu. He changed his name and has been sleeping on straw and tasting gall ever since. If he wants to take revenge on Xiangting, it is obviously not advisable to be brave. The Eagle Tower suddenly came to Yueyang, and people like Yang Tuyu, who are outstanding in martial arts and like-minded, naturally gathered here. Hearing Chang Shijian's words, Yang Tuyu looked in the direction of the lake. It's so close, why wait so long? Chang Shijian shook his head. If it was only Su Buling, we would naturally be sure, but there are more than 10 guests in the Su Wang mansion accompanying us, among whom there are hidden dragons and crouching tigers. It's a foolish dream to get on the boat. We can only wait until the time is right before we can act. The others nodded gently and didn't ask any more questions. Roosing. The rain curtain sprinkled on the oil paper umbrella, and the lights on the street reflected the brilliant light on the ground where the rainwater was accumulated. Two figures walked slowly in the rain curtain. Ning Yuhi walked slowly holding an umbrella, with the drunk Zhu Manzi lying on his back. Su Buling walked beside him, with the slender nightingale on his back. She also had a rosy face, but was more gentle than Manzi. She had fallen asleep, her face resting on Su Buling's shoulder, her long braid hanging down, sweeping across Su Buling's chest. The meal in the small shop was very happy. Manzi and Nightingale had a drinking contest, and neither of them was willing to give in. Unfortunately, both of them had a terrible alcohol tolerance, and they fell down after 2 bowls of rice wine. Manzi's alcohol tolerance was slightly higher. At this time, she hugged Ning Yuhi's neck, tilted her head dizzily, looked at Nightingale next to her, and pouted her lips, obviously a little jealous. Su Buling carried Nightingale on his back, feeling light and floating. He actually wanted to carry the bulging little Manzi on his back, but he had just seen Zulu, and was a little afraid that the elusive father-in-law would jump out and give him 2 swords, so he had to be honest. The journey was not far, and soon we arrived at the shore of Dongting Lake, where some pedestrians were rushing on the road in the rain. Ning Yuhi walked beside Su Buling, wearing couple outfits, and they both looked very pleasing to the eye, so naturally they attracted many people's attention. Seeing that both of them were carrying a half-grown girl on their backs, some whispers were heard. They look young. Yeah, I didn't expect the child to be so big. Ning Yuhi heard these messy compliments, and her steps slowed down by 2 steps, and she walked behind Su Buling, but in this way she looked more like a young wife who respected her husband. After thinking about it, she walked in front of Su Buling again. Su Buling was a little amused, and joked, "Master, what kind of body movement are you doing now? It looks quite mysterious." Ning Yuhi's calm face did not change much, but she casually said, "It's too late, go back quickly, you have to find King Yi tomorrow." Then she quickened her pace and ran directly to the building boat on the lake shore. Su Buling spread his hands, and Nightingale almost fell to the ground. He quickly hugged Nightingale and followed her onto the boat. The meal took a long time, and it was already very late. The maids had all gone to bed, and only the servants were patrolling on the deck. Ning Yuhi directly carried Manzi back to the room, while Su Buling went to the room next door to Mrs. Lu first. Mrs. Lu and Su Buling changed rooms, but Nightingale still lived next door. Mrs. Lu was already fast asleep. Su Buling gently placed Nightingale on the small bed. He raised his hands to help take off his clothes. As soon as he untied the skirt, he looked up and found that Nightingale was already awake. Nightingale lay on the pillow, looking at Su Buling with her big eyes open. The drunkenness in her eyes dissipated, but the blush on her face did not disappear. She was silent for a while, moved inward, leaving a place, and then seriously, "Sir, will you sleep here tonight?" you can take it off yourself. I'm going back to the room. Su Buling looked at the 15-year-old girl, scratched the bridge of Nightingale's nose with his fingers, then stood up and walked out. There was still a light on in the bedroom at the stern of the ship. After Su Buling washed up, he opened the door. He originally thought that Xiang had gone to sleep, but he didn't make a sound for fear of being disturbed. Only when he walked into the back room did he find Xiao Xiang, who was wearing a red dress and gorgeous makeup. Son, sitting by the dressing table and waiting quietly, with a bottle of wine beside him, looking at him with crooked eyes. Thank you to Mr. Cat for the 10,000 reward. Please give me some monthly tickets, I'm about to fall out of the top 100.